Hello horror hounds, welcome to my horror house. After the crushing disappointment of The Exorcist Believer, I was asking why in the 50 years since William Friedkin's Exorcist we haven't had another really good possession or exorcism movie. 50 years. One of the viewers of that video, Gerald Martin, left a comment below the video suggesting that it was perhaps because I was looking in the wrong direction, and rather than a decent movie coming out since The Exorcist, I should look 10 years before The Exorcist had even been made, to 1963, and an Italian movie called Il Demonio, aka The Demon, and one with a striking similarity to a sequence from Friedkin's movie. Sort of. Il Demonio is directed by Brunello Rondi and stars Dalia Lavi as Purificata, shortened to Purif in the movie. She is a lonely woman living in a small Italian country village, and she is obsessed with a man called Antonio. Obsessed to the point where she is trying to perform love spells on him, ceremonies to bewitch him, to capture his heart. And it's activity like that, and probably also the fact that she's on the outsides of this community and is probably a little bit weird, and as the movie goes along you imagine it's probably also that she suffers from poor mental health, that the majority of the village has branded her as a witch. And so we follow Purif, who is clearly a sensitive soul, clearly a delicate soul, whilst the superstitious forces of this insular world she lives in sort of amass around her. One of the absolute key strengths of this movie is its ambiguity. It plays with this notion of demonic possession. Is she? Is there even a supernatural element to this movie at all? Or is this entirely about a woman with mental health problems in a superstitious community that is absolutely unequipped to deal with that, and in fact the tools that they use at their disposal do much more harm than good? The first thing that strikes me about Il Demonio is that it looks astounding. It's absolutely astonishing. The photography is beautiful. It's a black and white film, and I don't think I'll ever get tired of saying this, but one of the things that really unlocked Italian horror cinema for me was just the money on screen. You can point at the countryside, you can point at the wonderful architecture, and you just got such a rich tapestry there. And I could sit and watch the way they photographed the Italian countryside in this movie, and the village and the architecture, and even the people's faces. Most of the people in this movie are locals from that area, non-actors. Yeah, I could have stayed and watched that all day. The second thing that absolutely stands out is Dalia Lavi's astonishing performance. There's barely a scene in this movie that she's not in. Purif is the focus of the film. The film asks you to empathise with her, whatever her condition is, be it supernatural or be it psychological. She is clearly the victim. The punishment that is meted out to her is rightfully the true horror of this movie. And Dalia Lavi she's absolutely captivating. You will see her, for a start, she's stunningly beautiful. But that's by the by. You will see her in the brief exorcism scene portray all the sort of possibilities of demonic possession and the like, and reaction to the cross and the holy rite, all just with her physicality and her facial expressions. No need for any special effects in this movie whatsoever. It's all there in camera and on screen, and I couldn't take my eyes off it. The ambiguity reminds me a lot more of George Romero's Martin than it does The Exorcist. With Romero's movie, you're never quite sure whether our protagonist is just a mentally ill serial killer or whether he is actually a vampire. It kind of doesn't matter. And here with Il Demonio, it also kind of doesn't matter whether or not Purif is actually possessed or not. And even if she is possessed, the main horror for me from this movie comes from the hypocrisy of the so-called sort of devout villagers who put on all the airs and graces of being a Christian community, but in a couple of certainly key moments in the movie descend very quickly into sort of superstitious beliefs. There's a scene where they hire a shaman to stand on a hill, and they all gather around him to try and shout away a storm cloud that is coming that will threaten their crops. Later on, when they have driven Purif from the village but still think that her presence is emanating in the very air of the village and contaminating it, they all run around with sort of lit sconces and flaming torches to set fire to the air, to burn out the evil influence of this poor sick woman that they've already driven from their village. The hypocrisy is absolutely writ large when not once but twice Purif is sexually assaulted. Let's call a spade a spade. She's raped. The second time is by some sort of a spiritual elder who her family put her in his care to drive out her demons, and instead he has his wicked way with her. He rapes her. There is a third scene which, depending on how you're going with whether this does have a supernatural aspect to it as well, the scene of her being overtaken by some unclean spirit, whether it's in her mind or not, is filmed like a rape sequence. Strangely reminded me of the possession sequence in Amityville 2, The Possession. If you go back and check my video from years ago, I'm absolutely convinced I described that as being filmed as a rape sequence. And both of those films, strangely, the camera is the POV of the invading spirit there. So another sort of strange coincidence with a possession movie that came after. Not as striking, though, as the coincidence, or coincidence with a question mark, between this and The Exorcist. During the exorcism scene, which is an absolute highlight of the movie and probably more realistic in its mundanity than the big Hollywood bells and whistles exorcism sequences in Friedkin's movie. During that exorcism sequence, our lead actress sort of starts contorting, bends herself up and starts spider walking. The spider walk sequence, obviously not included in the original theatrical cut of Friedkin's The Exorcist. We didn't get to see it until 2000 with the extended cut, but in between those decades, stills from that sequence had made its way into horror magazines and the like. It was talked about. The sequence is there in the novel. I checked that with Regina from Regina's Haunted Library, who at the moment was doing a deep dive into the Exorcist franchise, so was reading the novel. So had William Peter Blatty watched Il Demonio and sort of taken that spider walk sequence from that movie and put it into his book, or is it a stark and quite intriguing coincidence? I'm not one to say. I don't think it matters. What I think does matter is that the spider walk sequence in the film from 10 years earlier is better. I think the possession sequence is stronger for being more mundane and more realistic. So all in all, Il Demonio is a fascinating movie that looks beautiful with a captivating central performance. It is a slow-moving movie. It's Feels like an art house movie for sure. It's possibly 20 minutes too long. There's a whole sequence after she's run out of the village where she spends some time in a nunnery that I'm not entirely sure adds much to the movie. But if you like your supernatural horror super ambiguous and super cerebral, so you'll want to mull over and think about what you actually saw and whether there is indeed any aspect of the supernatural whatsoever in this movie, it kind of doesn't matter whether there is or there isn't, because, as I say, the real story and the true horror is the way that a superstitious community can take one member of that community, one of the weakest members, and single them out as the source of all their woes and troubles, and like a literal scapegoat, funnel all of their anger and frustrations and, yes, fears into that one person and mete out all of that in horrible fashion. So, yeah, to find a possession movie that has some chance of standing in the rarefied atmosphere of William Friedkin's The Exorcist, you actually have to look to 1963, 10 years before The Exorcist came out. But I strongly recommend you seek out and watch Il Demonio, aka The Demon.
I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.